Welcome to New Polity Podcast. My name is Michael Boland. I'm the executive director of New Polity. I've been in this role for 9 months. I'm here with Dr. David Schindler, DC Schindler, who wrote actually our first book for New Polity Press. And the occasion for these interviews that we've been doing with him is a paperback version of this book. It will be coming out soon. So we'll have that available for you soon. Dr. Schindler is also happens to be my dissertation director at the John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family in Washington, D.C., where he's professor of metaphysics and anthropology, writing on Henri de Lubac and the relationship between church and political order. So this is an apt book to discuss for my dissertation.
Yeah, in fact, well. I thought we were here to talk about your dissertation. But
after that.
Maybe afterward.
So why don't we just dive right in? So start with the title, The Politics of the Real. So the real you mentioned in the introduction comes from the Latin res, things. And then you have this interesting description of Heidegger's understanding of that and sort of a thing as in a way a gathering place. It's sort of you perceive a thing, but it has all sorts of relationships to all other things around it. It's a focal point, bringing together the whole of reality in a way, maybe. Right. You could say.
Right.
So maybe you could say a word about that. Just that sort of interesting and new understanding of things. I don't think we're used to thinking of things as sort of discrete objects, right there in front of me, and maybe it relates to something else if I choose to relate it to something else. But,
right. We tend to have a very just pragmatic attitude, disposition towards things. It's funny. I don't know what it was that initially prompted the reflection, but it occurred to me that the notion of reality is connected to politics in all sorts of obvious ways. So the res publica, the republic, one of the names for the political order, and then of course there's the realpolitik, a certain way of a realism that informs a kind of attitude towards politics. And as I reflected on that, it occurred to me that presents an interesting to think about politics in terms of reality. Presents a really interesting contrast or alternative to what had increasingly become apparent to me was a fundamental problem of our contemporary way of approaching politics. It seems to me one of the fundamental problems with contemporary thought generally, but politics in particular, is the priority that we give to abstractions and to what's unreal. This is behind all utopian thinking in politics, but more subtly, it informs our sense of freedom. We tend to think of freedom in terms of possibility, potential. We tend not to think of freedom in terms of actuality. That's a notion I develop in the book. But that led me to think of approach politics in a really different sort of way. For me, it was very, very different to think about what happens if we start not with abstractions, with abstract ideals or pure possibility, potentiality, but just start with things, the reality of things. And Heidegger was an inspiration for that too. His sense of things as gathering, and what does that mean? Well, I mean, if you think about it, I hope this doesn't sound too sort of mystical or abstract, but any given thing, any given reality, there's a certain it's something identifiable. It's an object. Very often, it has a use that one can make of it. But if you actually are very attentive, if you pay attention, you recognize that things, they're not just themselves. They have a kind of meaning that radiates beyond themselves, that they somehow can have an effect on a whole room. So to be very concrete, just think about if we're sitting here, we have things in front of our faces here, we have microphones that that creates a kind of an expectation, a disposition. It creates a certain awkwardness, talking to each other with these weird things in front of our faces. But it sets a kind of horizon and a mood and a spirit and a kind of character. But let's say we took these away and we had a pizza in front of us. The whole spirit of our community would be different. Or if we had like a chessboard, so you put a different thing and suddenly the nature of the community and its actual being lived changes. So what happens if we think about politics based on real things, realities, as the kind of governing principles that order the way we live? They mediate our relationships to each other, and they order the way we live.
Right. Yeah. And even you think of the way that things say something about the world. Like a microphone says all sorts of things about the world. And the world that we're speaking to. A pizza would it would have all sorts of implications for where it came from and what we're doing. Communing over a meal. All those sorts of things. And so when you start to think about politics in that sense, you think about what kind of spaces are we creating?
That's right.
What does it mean to own a place and to make it your own and to do that in relationship with others?
Yeah.
The 4th Street downtown over here that you saw.
Yeah.
All these houses are close together,
and
we're all living together and creating sort of a space with the things that we cultivate.
That's right.
And we cultivate those things. We arrange them in certain ways. And that speaks something both about who we are, what the things are, the environment that we find ourselves in, even how we understand ourselves in relation to God. I mean, you can't escape that.
No, so that sounds like we're making stuff up or reading things into it, but it really is quite concrete and actual and real. There are all kinds of relationships that go into. So here's a mug that was fabricated in a particular factory, probably stamped with a kind of an image. The image has a history. That there's a whole history of relationships that are built into particular things. Both in where they come from, but then also, this is what Heidegger, I think, means in part by talking about things gathering. When I relate to this mug, I'm relating to the physical world. I'm relating to nature. Therefore, I'm relating to the creator of nature. I'm relating to the people who have made this and the claims that are made that I make on them and they make on me, and through these things. So all these things, all realities, things. Every res is a res publica, I like to say. Everything is a public thing. And everything gathers a community together and orders the relationships in a particular way. And that includes our relationship to God.
Right. Yeah. And maybe could you say that those sorts of things, the things that we find ourselves around, they sort of provide like an avenue for a direction for freedom to like our willing and our movement toward happiness. It's only enacted on the path of things.
Yeah, right. Well, the first thing is our body.
But then you build a society around that.
Right.
Right.
There you go. Yeah.
Or you don't.
Or you don't. Right.
Right.
Well, you always do in some sense, but you either do it well and properly or badly and in a way that's actually destructive. But yeah, that's right. When we act, we always act from within a situation. And that situation is our body, the condition of our body, the things that are surrounding us. These are all real, and they are, disposing us in certain directions. They're calling our attention. They're bringing us out of ourselves. And when we make a choice inside of this movement that is already, underway by the things that are here. And so that ends up giving our freedom direction. It gives it a certain character, a certain spirit, and think about. I mean, microphones. Think about how differently something that is really good, intrinsically good, genuine, a genuine reality, how that brings, sharing a meal of excellent food, that brings out the best of the people doing it, and they have an easier time. It's really interesting when you actually set a festive table. The conversation tends to be better. The people are just brought out of themselves. They feel free. Their minds are open to higher things, as opposed to everybody eating out of, styrofoam trays, on the way. There's no conversation that happens there. And so you see these real things are actually profoundly affecting us.
Right. And then we tend to think of that in terms of, you can interpret that in various ways. Like, is this just an emotional sort of response, which presumes sort of a deterministic, mechanistic understanding of human psychology, or are these candles and flowers on the table and different things like that, a well-crafted meal? Yeah. Is that bringing out something more human in us, which actually allows us to move toward our end as humans, speaking, with one another, talking about reality, talking about our shared world, the common good that we find ourselves in the midst of.
I mean, I think your question answers itself. I mean, it's clear that those things, have a profound difference, and they affect us ontologically. I mean, they also affect us psychologically, but our psychological state doesn't come out of the blue. It's a response to reality. It's always a response to reality. So you move from the dinner, well-crafted dinner at the table, then you think of the importance of the common spaces that we have, and the monuments, the public squares, the trees on the street. You think of how those will affect a community. Then you move on to that, ultimately you're talking about the quality of the common goods that in fact are determining the nature of our community. And it has a profound effect on how we understand ourselves. It forms our imagination. It guides our choices and educates us.
Yeah. At the beginning, you sort of bring out these three traditions, and we're sort of presupposing all of this right now.
Yeah.
But maybe it would be helpful to just touch on them. You talk about the Greeks and a certain sense of transcendence that they bring out, an interiority of nature. Yeah. The Romans bring out sort of a cultural dimension to this, that everything we're talking about, institutional dimension. Yeah. And then the Jewish people, which it brings out this sort of relationship to God, and also this sense of history.
That's right.
Yeah. Maybe you could just touch on how that's how that changes our understanding of things, how we talk about them, and maybe moving into then, what is it that's happening to that, synthesis that you describe in liberalism?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Sure. So, I mean, first of all, this is a growing theme for me. The thinking of Christianity as a kind of convergence of the Greeks, the Romans, and the Jews. And in a certain sense, this is something I discussed with Andrew Willard-Jones, the Germanic tribes, the Germans. It's funny, Hegel actually speaks to those four influences. But Christianity is a kind of convergence of these and a synthesis of these. I mean, historically, you can show that this is the case, but it also makes sense, I think, philosophically, that what happens in Christianity is that these form a kind of a novel unity, a synthesis, a whole that really transforms each of them so that they become sort of interpreted in relation to each other. To put it really simply, the anthropological, the metaphysical or cosmological, and then the theological elements all are in Christianity. They come together and they interpret each other. So in terms of things, you think about it. The Jewish dimension, if you will, is the the theological provenance, that all things are ultimately created by God and reflections of God and bear traces of God. They're words spoken by God. The Greek sense is thing with a as an internal principle and in intrinsic intelligibility and a reality. Things are good and true and beautiful, and these constitute these are essential to what a thing is. And then the Roman sense is the cultural and political public dimension, a res publica, that things also, their meaning also depends on how we relate to them and the words that we give to them ourselves and the use to which we put them, and our very recognition of things. It's when people say that you'll hear some people say the expression, well, I didn't even know that was a thing, right? What do they mean? They mean not that I didn't know that existed. What they mean is I didn't know it was recognized by many people, and that recognition sort of establishes it as a reference point. Right. Yeah, that's the Roman contribution to what a thing is. It seems. And
I mean, you're not saying, I mean, these sorts of are you saying these sorts of things in absolute terms, or as I understand it, it's more like a historical, symbolic focal point for these sorts of ways of conceiving of things? Albeit, I mean, maybe there's a special character to the Jewish people with obviously the revelation of God coming down, and there's something new there.
Yeah.
But with the Romans and the Greeks, they're sort of, their thought gathers around these sorts of ideas of this institutional cultural dimension and
right.
Nature,
and right. So it's not that it's exclusive to these cultures, but I think it's not an accidental fact that they, in a certain sense, perfected these so that they become kind of paradigmatic. The Greeks really discovered philosophy, and so that they put their stamp that they're not the only philosophical people in history, but they kind of symbolically represent a philosophical dimension. The Jews were unique with that God called, the absoluteness of God is something that is, again, perfected in this particular culture. And then the Romans perfected the institution, office of, law, the legal nomos, to use the Greek term, that sort of dimension. So I think that, it's first of all historically true that Christianity is the convergence of these things, obviously in a novel way in Christ, but then it's also it also is symbolically that these kind of carry a symbolic weight. So if I may, you mentioned about liberalism, to bring that dimension, and it seems to me that what liberal culture is in a way is so. If it is the case that Christianity is a kind of convergence of these, a synthesis that mediate them to each other and gather up this paradigmatic human culture, that's a reality, and that synthesis only works as something that really happened in Christ and really passed on. Was extended into the world through the church, and so the history of the church, in a way, takes on a fascinating significance here. It's the church is the guardian of this synthesis, and so in a way, this might seem like a really bold claim, but I would say the church is a guardian of things, and what happened with the Reformation, the breaking of the church, the so-called wars of religion, and the attempt to try to recover a kind of peace, now no longer in and with the history of the church, but as a kind of an alternative to the Catholic synthesis. What you end up doing is you take these, you take the synthesis falls apart, and now we grab the pieces, we sort of cobble together the various pieces of the synthesis, but now on the basis of a new principle that really is an alternative to the church. And what that means is that this is why I think liberalism, it's not just a political theory. It's not just a new way of thinking about politics. It actually, precisely because the church was the guardian of things and therefore the guardian of reality, to try to possess, to enjoy these things, to use these things, to assume them outside of the church requires a rethinking of the whole of reality, every dimension of it. And so liberalism really is a complete revision of the whole Catholic synthesis.
Right, but also, in a way that claims to leave everything in place.
Yeah.
So it's but the fundamental move being sort of an untethering from, I guess maybe you could say, from an institutional standpoint primarily.
Yeah.
From the sort of baggage of this understanding of nature, this theology, this sort of institutional aspects of the theology,
right.
And allowing that to continue to subsist and exist.
Yeah.
And now what's conceived of as a private sphere.
Yeah.
But then maybe we could talk about what that does to those traditions. I mean,
right.
because you theoretically can hold on to them and maintain them, but if there's public expression necessary for it, these sorts of questions
Their
are the ones that
changes.
arise.
No,
right.
I mean, well, that's what it seems to me that's what you get with liberalism. You say, no, we have faith, we have law, we have nature, intelligible grasp of nature, but these. What happens when they're outside of the synthesis? So in the Catholic, big C and little c synthesis, faith was mediated in and through both nature and politics, and so it has a natural. It bears on the very meaning of reality, and it has a natural public expression. But if we take it out of that synthesis, now faith becomes private belief. And it doesn't. It's not a revelation of the meaning of reality. It's just about God.
It seems to be sort of a religion without things.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really take that things philosophical analysis seriously, and how they say something in themselves about the nature of things, about the nature of reality, about the nature of human beings, and how we arrange them culturally and within our homes, and how we understand them says something also about God.
Yeah.
So if things aren't important, then you can have just direct relationship with God. And then what liberalism presumes is that you can have that direct relationship with God. Nobody's stopping you from that.
Right.
But the institutional format, that's reserved for certain spaces that are sort of sectioned off, and you're allowed to have that. So, what's the big deal?
Yeah,
right?
That's right. So, I mean, that's exactly, it seems like it's all there, but everything has been completely, it's like the joke from, what's his name? The comedian.
Stephen Wright.
Yeah.
I've heard.
Right. He comes home. He says, I came home to my apartment and everything had been stolen and replaced with identical replicas. And I mean, in a certain sense, that's what liberalism is, sort of taking everything out, removing it from this context of the Catholic tradition, and then giving it back to you. Now on, it looks the same in one respect, but the meaning of it and the fundamental, the depth of it has been completely evacuated and changed.
Yeah, all the tethers to religion, all the tethers to other things.
Yeah,
I mean,
and to nature, to the transcendentals, goodness, truth, and beauty. Yeah. So now you have politics. It's no longer an interpretation of the meaning of God, an interpretation of the meaning of being. It's just pure legal positivism. Right, and then you no longer have metaphysics. You have just science, which is, a reductive approach to the meaning of nature that's no longer connected to religion, God, and it's no longer informed by culture. It's separate. It's separated out from culture. That one's more subtle, but I think it's really important to see. So again, it looks like this is one of the reasons why liberalism was so persuasive for so long. Is, people say, well, what do you mean? We've got law that protects. We're serious about law, natural law, even sometimes they'll say, but now natural law means something very different when it's not part of the tradition. We have the objectivity of science, and we have sincere belief. Isn't that what you want? And you don't realize that those things have all been transformed in the process.
Yeah. And you put this in the book in terms of a priority, metaphysically speaking, of potency over actuality.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of implications of that we could talk about. Maybe we could just start with, what does that mean on the level of political order to prioritize potency? I mean, there's something there, ordering the polis.
Yeah.
But there's it's ordering it in such a way that it's saying, well, everything is available to you.
Right.
We're making all potentialities, available within certain limits.
Right.
How you define those limits is a question, but so then, what does that do? Or maybe we could explain the metaphysics of it too.
They're limits, but they're limits that are purely pragmatic, and they're not rooted in the natures of things. So you have a political horizon that's not set, first of all, by the reality of a tradition. I mean, I think that's really crucial. I increasingly, it seems to me clearer and clearer that when you potentialize religion, because God is the ultimate, that sort of potentializing religion sort of ends up implying a kind of potentializing of every other sort of reality. So when you say we're not our political order is not beholden to a particular religious tradition, we're just going to put a placeholder here for God and allow individuals to fill that. What we've done is made God a kind of a potential object that then is actualized through individual acts of freedom. And now we've made that the very first principle of the whole of reality. And anything that would have had a claim on us as an actual reality loses it, and it just becomes an option. Right. The whole world, like all of the goods that face us, they're not goods, they're options. And one's relationship to options is very different from one's relationship to goods.
Yeah, maybe this is a good place to talk about your one of your chapters. You what was the title of it? America Unfounded.
Oh yeah.
And you talk about
that sounds right. I don't remember.
All of what we're talking about is in a way, my understanding of it is that it's sort of symbolically realized in history in the founding of America.
Yeah.
In the sense of the sort of enthronement of nature's God.
Right. Right.
And nature's God being this sort of notion of God that is, as we've been saying, untethered from a tradition.
Yeah.
So that it's a God that can relate to any denomination, any religion.
Yeah.
It's just the God of nature, of natural order.
Yeah. But so, what's so interesting?
Keeps things on track, running.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing that's so interesting is even the natural order there doesn't mean nature as it meant in the classical tradition. It's actually a rethinking of nature outside of this tradition. And so it tends to a kind of scientific positivism too. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing in principle wrong with the notion of nature's God. I mean, because even as Catholics, we would speak about nature's God, and but that phrase means something radically different if you see it as an expression that arises out of this actual tradition. Or you negate any tradition and you begin from this abstract place of reason, and then you posit nature's God. Those are actually two fundamentally different things. So it is the case that theology recognizes a natural theology and a natural conception of God, but that recognition is actually the expression of a kind of a concrete. It comes within the context of an affirmation of the priority of reality. It's not speaking of that as a pure abstraction of reason.
Kind of like the things once they're abstracted out, or once you abstract God out of the whole tradition in which he's been formulated in this confluence of the Greeks, Romans, and Jews in the Catholic tradition.
Yeah.
Once you sort of excise a notion of God as just nature's God, what you've done is changed how we understand God entirely by just abstracting him and in a way forgetting what you left behind.
Yeah, that's right. Then if you think about it, I mean, they're actually, you end up with this kind of pure abstract essence of God. And then, what happens to the incarnation? What happens to, the Trinity? What happens to, and you might say, well, those are things you as an individual can believe. You're free to believe. And what that means is you're sort of adding those as your own, they become non-essential to the meaning of God. And in fact, this is actually really hard to grasp, but it's something one needs to really reflect carefully. It seems like you can still believe those things for yourself, but in fact, if our political horizon is determined by the abstraction of God, and so a certain abstract notion of religious freedom, I can't believe these things because I can't believe them in the way that they were always believed until this point in history, which is, in history you gave your assent to something that was actual and real and binding on everybody. And now this is a choice that I'm making. And so I've changed the nature of it's not religion in the proper sense, actually. It's an abstract kind of faith. So, this is really, religious freedom in these terms is not a freedom for religion at all, because a religion that has been chosen simply as an option is not a religion.
Yeah. And one expression of that in terms of liberalism comes in like this limitation of the common good, this sort of truncation of it. We're only going to go up to a certain level, and religion is above that, and the state is incompetent with respect to any religious questions. Right. But of course, soon enough that becomes an incompetence with questions of nature.
That's right.
And other just fundamental realities. You see them sort of expressing themselves in sort of legal decisions where there's no discussion about what a human being is. It's just about
what rights we have in kind of this abstract sense,
right? Like harm or helping in some sort of abstract, sort of commonsensical way, I suppose, but really in a sort of more utilitarian register.
That's right. Think about that. It's we've gone somehow from not having a public recognition of God, right? So in the founding, the separation, the established, non-establishment of religion, that has over time come to mean that we can't say in a kind of public objective sense what's good and what's true and what's beautiful. We can, that nature doesn't have a claim on us. All of these things. It seems like you're betraying democracy to make a truth claim, and that's really amazing. Do you see? But if this argument that we've been sort of talking about is correct, that actually makes sense. That rejection of the priority of the actuality or reality of God would lead to once we reject that priority, it leads to a kind of an undermining of all these other claims.
Right. Yeah. Maybe, I want to talk about eventually this idea of property in the body. I think it's a really interesting illustrative point of everything that we've been trying to arrive at. In a way, I'll let you explain it, but the body as sort of a both a limitation, but also that which enables us to actualize ourselves. I mean, and we do that in relation to things.
Right.
So maybe you could.
Sure. It's interesting. The question is whether the body is property, and it's just an interesting legal question. And I take some sort of legal arguments in the book and some discussion in jurisprudence and so forth about the meaning of that and connect it to this larger philosophical question. At the heart of which it seems to me is this evolution in the meaning of property. So I'm draw out this comparison between property in the pre-modern world and then the notion that property receives in the modern within the modern horizon. And in a way, it's kind of simple. And John Locke is a sort of a very helpful marker of this transformation. So in the ancient world, let me begin by comparing it first to the body. All right. So what is the body? It's the outward manifestation of myself, my personhood.
Maybe you could talk about rights too, as sort of an expression of that. This sort of outward manifestation of an extension
of
my natural
nature.
powers
that's right.
recognized by the political authority.
Yeah. So remember that. Let's come back to that.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Okay. So I'm not just a spirit that's somehow trapped in this thing. The body just is, you might say, my soul's entry into the public realm, the world. It's manifest in and through the body. So my very existence is already this movement out. My selfhood is kind of made available to others in and through the body, and then also it's in and through the body that I am able to engage with the world. I can pick up my mug. I can talk into the microphone. This is in and through the body, So it's the body becomes a kind of mediation between myself and the other, meaning the whole reality. Property was in the classical understanding was kind of an extension of that. When I own something, to own something is actually rather than my taking it into my private sphere and sort of taking it out of the world. To own something is to extend my presence in the world even further. So I beyond just my body, now I'm out in the public through my home, through my house.
An analogous extension of your body in a way.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah. So in a way, it's precisely by owning property that I become, a meaningful figure in the community. And then the things I own, my property, all of these are mediators that enable my relation. So this ties into our discussion of things at the very beginning. They become sort of symbols of mediation that make me present to others and allow me to receive others and receive their presence. So now what happens with John Locke is there's a radical separation between the private and the public. And we begin to think of a property when I don't own something, it's out in the world. But when I own it, I'm taking it out of the public sphere, and I'm bringing it into this purely private realm that is where I am with myself. So it's almost the exact opposite. And then we think of the body as not the place wherein we are available to the world, but something over which I have absolute control. And you just think about, there's a radical difference of the meaning of human existence in that comparison.
Right, sort of a shifting and turning of property into something that I protect from those who wish to take it, or unless they have a discrete affirmation of my will to use it.
That's right.
Versus property as a sort of outward facing, you might say. As something that
the way I participate.
Right.
With others. Yeah. This is like Catholic social thought, that private property for public use, and what that means is that things naturally have the form of hospitality. The reason for my house is to have a place for us to not just to live, but that precisely means to be able to receive others and enter into relations with others.
And in a way, you could say that maybe duty towards hospitality extends from the thing itself. The thing itself demands, to be, brought,
a res publica.
Right.
Publica. I mean, so that's where you see, right? It's to own something, we have to do justice to it, and we are responding to its thinghood, its reality, and that gives content and depth and substance to our personality and our freedom, and it also opens it to others.
Yeah, and I mean for liberalism, it seems to be creating sort of a sphere where everything is defined by rights that entail this sort of notion of property, where it's sort of I own my body, I own all of the things that I have, right. And everybody else owns their body and their things, but if the public expression of what we are doing in a society is important in the political order and how it understands itself, then it seems that then stifles any sort of sense of commonness, any sort of sense of like a participation that we all have in something that we share in, without diminishment, but. It's sort of instead
there are no real common goods.
Every relationship has to be a discrete intentional action, coming outside of my absolute sphere of sovereignty.
Yeah, that's right.
And relating to you.
Right. They're just atomistic individuals acting on each other, even if that is a consensual relationship, it's still understood. There's no real intimacy. That's the thing. So things actually enable intimacy. They actually enable. I mean, that's one of the beauties and mysteries of our embodied existence. Is things we're able to bond over stuff. And that's. I mean, we all experience that. So to connect it with rights. There's one way to think about rights as being an extension of ourselves, our natures, our bodies in the positive way we've been talking. And here, a right, the way I define it in the book, is a social extension of a natural power. So I have a certain right to eat. And that is because it's natural to me to eat, and these are things that within the limits of a particular political economic organization, those need to be respected because they are reflections. They're an extension of myself out into society. What happens in the modern world is we actually separate. Rights become abstract powers, so they're not founded in what we are naturally. They're simply claims that we make on others that have no reality as a reference point. So the only thing that actually gives right substance is, political fiat and coercive power and a kind of imposition of force. So a really good example. Sorry, you were going to say.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say. I mean, it's just to recapitulate, but It seems that rights become there is still this sort of protective element of rights. I have a right to food because I have a natural power that should be socially recognized to eat and sustain myself. But then what happens in the turn of liberalism or the philosophy of Locke is that you have that sort of absolutized in a way that it's only negative.
Yeah.
It's really not a positive thing. And, and to whatever extent it was, that sort of no longer matters.
Yeah, right. Right. And because it's a pure potency, it never actually makes any real claim on others. And so, I mean, you see how it discourages. I mean, this is the thing that's so interesting. Rights are multiplied, but there's no, they're multiplied ad infinitum because there's actually no natural realities. They're pure, potencies. They're unrealities. There are no natural realities that are actually giving them shape and direction and meaning. And when that goes, they also no longer have a kind of a natural claim implied, and you think of a healthy community, it's natural to take care of the people that, so, in my neighborhood, if somebody, people know each other, they love each other, there are some genuine common goods that are shared. And if somebody gets sick, without much ado, people bring meals to that person. And there's a certain sense in which you just naturally, they have a right to eat. We don't even use that language. We just are respecting who they are, and it's spontaneous and it's natural. But this would be like a social extension of a natural power. Their natural, need for sustenance is extended socially. It's naturally appreciated. Now, if you think of people as simply having rights in this abstract sense, you don't feel an obligation to go out and help the person. You understand, because it's so negative, it's just I can't transgress their rights. So it actually drives us further and further away from each other, and we're less on each other's minds, you might say. Right.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about how why. I guess I'll pose it as a question: why is it that rights, once you have this conception and the priority of potency is there, how do they affirm themselves? Like how do they continue in existence? That's sort of
only by legal fiat. And so what's so interesting is then what happens is these rights only exist insofar as you have a kind of a policing system and a kind of centralized power, the sovereignty and coercive force to enforce them. That's the only reality they actually have. And so the multiplication of rights coincides with an increasing encroachment of the state into human existence, which is very different from the example that I gave about our help feeding each other in the neighborhood. The state is involved in that because these claims, in a way, have a reality that's just evident in them. They're real, and so they don't have to be invented by sovereign force.
Right, and I suppose they're continually reinforced within the conflicts that occur between rights of different individuals.
Yeah,
so that's how they just continue on,
we
assume that
and the fragmentation continues.
And you can assume a sort of richer basis for them. Mm-hmm. I mean, many people do, but I think we're trying to get at this sort of more fundamental principles and where those lead. Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, in that sense, maybe we could talk a bit about the sense of freedom. Sort of. You could describe it as a freedom, in the words of Surveyor Spinker, is freedom of indifference, a sort of a contentless freedom, and then the relationship that has then to property. To bring it back to property, if we can, the relationship that has to property as something that fulfills our freedom. But if you have, on the one hand, a sort of contentless freedom, a contentless chooser, and that's the fulfillment of freedom is basically the act of choosing.
Yeah, right.
Then relationship to property seems to then become one of acquiring. So when I actualize my freedom in relation to property, it's just the act of acquisition. Which seems pretty dissatisfying.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't let you really dwell with things.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to say about that. This is one of the reasons why it seems to me we tend to think increasingly of property as or wealth in terms of money, and by that we mean purchasing power.
Right. It's kind of perfect for a new notion of property.
That's right. That's right. And for a particular sense of freedom. And so your freedom, the more purchasing power you have, the freer you have. And that's that in a way, freedom. Think about what's
sort
happening
of the symbolic
here.
enactment of this notion of freedom is just purchasing power.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's right. And think about how it's a pure abstraction. That the moment I actually spend my money, I lose some of my freedom and some of my power. And so the whole logic of it, points to this kind of, and this is where Marx actually, I think, has some genuine insight. There's a kind of intrinsic logic to a sort of hoarding of capital. I mean, capital, though, as just pure, more and more, we don't even have dollar bills, and the penny is gone. Like it's becoming less and less real, and more just numbers in the clouds. And as a pure abstraction, you think about this. Compare that to an older sense of property that we were just discussing, and then the older sense of freedom that would go along with that. You see this reflected in some old discussions of the nature of freedom that don't make any sense to us anymore. Having property and being a free man, it's not because your options are when we hear free man, we can only think, well, you've multiplied your options. But in the older sense, you are free precisely because you might say your personality sticks so far out into the public sphere because of your property. That is your freedom. I mean, that's such a totally different way. Now, here's another example. In the modern sense of freedom, you're free to choose your spouse. But once you've made a choice and married, your freedom stops, right? Now I no longer have freedom because I'm now bound. So I only have freedom insofar as I haven't bound myself and my options are open. Compare that to this older way, which says that in fact, freedom is founded in reality and actuality. And now that I have joined myself to a wife, and then eventually to children, and then have a home, the very things that are binding me are actually expanding my being, and the being indissolubly married is an expression of freedom, not a limitation of it.
Right. Yeah. The union with a spouse, the children that come, a house, it becomes sort of the field of your freedom.
Yeah.
To show itself forth, to become more full.
That's right.
To exercise itself, we move toward a fulfillment, both in the family, but then in the city too. Yeah, I mean, beyond that. I mean, the family being oriented towards that.
That's right. And then our local. I mean, you see how. Going down this path, this is politics of the real, right? You begin with the realities that are actually there and kind of work your way out. Which is not a denial of the priority of the whole over the parts. I mean, it's actually the proper way to affirm that, I think.
Yeah, I'd like to at some point return to the marriage idea, because you bring that up at the end in relation to the spiritual and the temporal an analogy there. But maybe we could say a word about what this means for our understanding of religious freedom. With this priority of actuality coming from a tradition that has a history, how is it that we're not throwing away the achievements of liberalism, of foregrounding this notion of religious freedom, and there's all sorts of things that we could say about that, Yeah, so I'll toss that to you for now.
So right. So this is actually a very difficult question, and I don't know what to make of it ultimately. I mean, this becomes a very mysterious thing and complicated thing given our history. So let me just mention some principles, and then if you have a response to some of it. But the idea that you preserve religious freedom by making freedom or making religion an option. We've already talked about this, but I think that actually doesn't work. You end up actually eliminating all religion. So what we tend to think of as religious freedom is actually not. It's actually not freedom, and it's not religion. So it's actually, you lose everything. So but then the very difficult question is, well, what's our alternative? And the first thing that one has to say is, if you begin with the priority of the actuality, the openness to freedom has to come from a deepening of what's actually given and what's actually there. And I think religious freedom can only properly understood come from a deepening of our roots in the actual Christian tradition, the reality of God's entry into history in and through the church. Now, that might say, oh, well, that's not freedom at all, because you're just establishing one church and rejecting all others. What I would say in response to that is that it seems to me, and I think that this can be shown, and I think that this is the best reading of Dignitas Humanae. I mean, that's a very controversial document, but I think that you could actually show that a commitment to this tradition in a way enables one to appreciate other religions more and actually do more justice to them. And that might seem implausible at first, but very concretely speaking, it seems to me that, and I've heard this said, well, actually, let me put it from the other side. When I was an undergraduate student, I had many teachers that were liberals, very clearly liberals, that were hostile to the Catholic identity of my university. And you could just it came out subtly but constantly in everything they said and did. And it turned out the teacher that I had that was one of, if not the most respectful, of the Catholic identity of the school was the Jewish professor. And the thing is, that's not surprising actually. And I know that like a Muslim feels more comfortable around an actual Catholic than a liberal. Why? Well, there's something a Catholic, precisely one who is devoted to tradition in and through the church, is able to appreciate another person's devotion to tradition in the tradition they've grown up in, which is different from saying, let's be fair by eliminating the significance of all traditions. Right, yeah. And then we're going to encounter each other as not belonging to any tradition. That's actually not religious freedom. You're undermining the very principle of religion for everybody. Right. Yeah. Why is it that we have seemingly more in common with a serious Muslim or a serious Jew than a serious liberal? Yeah, that's right. And I mean, one thing that you bring out is that there's a good summum bonum that exists in the liberal conception of this sort of limited common good. I mean, you call it, I think, a totalitarian logic of its own self-limitation. That's right. Because that itself then imposes an idea of, well, this is what God can mean. Yeah, that's right. Insofar as it's expressed publicly in any way. And if we have this rich conception of, what is and isn't public, I mean, if you, with things, then really everything is public. You can't live a religion unless except publicly. And that means I mean, unless your city does. I mean that's the thing. So go ahead. Well, you have, I mean, at least in the Catholic tradition, I mean, you have the with Dignitatis Humanae this recognition, right, of the freedom as necessary in the act of faith. Yeah. So coming at it from that angle, you would recognize that
other religions, freedom is integral to a genuine act of faith, and religions have public expression.
Right.
They need it.
That's right.
If they're going to maintain the religious impulse, they need some sort of public expression.
Yeah.
So that would be more privileged.
Right. They would be more respectful of the demands, which doesn't, in principle, one of the things that's established in Dignitatis Humanae is that, recognized because it was always part of the faith, is that faith can't be coerced. And it can't be publicly coerced, but it's really interesting, and this is what opens up a lot of many cans of many worms. But people think that to establish a religion, or to have a nation recognize the authority of a particular religion, somehow is necessarily coercive. That actually doesn't follow at all, and I think that that's a presupposition that really needs to be investigated. Is the best way for me to preserve the freedom of my children in their relationship to God by not talking to them of God ever, by sort of removing any religious symbols in the house, making sure that nothing they never hear about God until they reach a certain age, and then let them make an arbitrary choice? Is that the only? No, clearly, as parents, what do? You bring them into the faith, you surround them, but you do so in a way that recognizes that as they mature, in the mysteries and the historical drama, the dramas of their own heart and their own encounters with reality in the world and their friends and God, they may turn away, and you don't force them to stay. You recognize that eventually this is something that they will either consent to with their freedom or they won't. So it's not coerced, but it is there, and it's objectively there, and you never hide that fact.
I think this a quote from later in the book, just before you have a discussion of Catholic integralism and the sort of resurgence that it's had in recent years. You say liberalism does not want to deny the good; it simply wants to separate goodness from order, and then go on to affirm both separately. This affirmation, however, takes the form of a fragmentary division of labor. Order is the business of the state, and goodness is the business of civil society. So you're sort of bringing out this distinction that liberalism makes between civil society and sort of political order, the business of the state. So when it comes to the question of, okay, if we don't want sort of the separation, then how do we unite them? Becomes the question. And with integralism, it seems a question that comes up in your book is, is the separation of goodness from order still present in that contemporary iteration of integralism? Is it united enough in its union? So if you have a recognition of the Catholic tradition as a starting point for recognition of the truth and goodness of things, and how is that affirmed?
So these are, integralism has so many different. It's constantly evolving, and when I wrote the book, and people don't use the word anymore, or very rarely. So these things are always on the move, and people might say, integral or liberalism also has different faces and so forth, and all of that has to be acknowledged. But at least one form of contemporary integralism, or whatever it calls itself now, a kind of
Catholic political order.
Right. Yeah, it goes under many names. The concern for me is that there, and I don't want to make a blanket statement, because there are people that there are great differences among the people that sort of represent this view, but at least one version of it seems to accept a certain essentially bureaucratic or secular, a certain conception of the modern state, but then wants to add to that the authority of the church that can wield the state as an instrument. So the state just needs, it's got its own procedures, it's got its own way of doing things, it's got its kind of natural foundation. It just needs to be either pointed, it tends to point to the bad kinds of goods, and we just need to steer the ship in the other direction and point it to higher sorts of goods. But what you get there is that's purely extrinsicist, and that kind of pointing, it's a force coming from the outside, so that it tends to always take the form of this kind of coercive command from above that dictates now where things should go. And so it seems to recapitulate at a higher level the very mechanisms of liberal politics, now just sort of multiplied, as opposed to entering in. The church should liberate the state to govern itself.
Right. Yeah, I think it seems the temptation in these sorts of things is that the church then almost takes up the governing actions of the state, at least in sort of a way that we can check it and we can direct it this way or that if it's going in the wrong direction. Yeah. And that's a church action, properly speaking. Then,
right. Right.
Whereas, I think at one point you used the language of indirect but intrinsic. Which I think is a really interesting way to put it. So that the political order still has its distinction, its autonomy. It's still moving toward that same end that the church is, but from a natural perspective, from the properly political sphere.
Right. So
and even from the lowest levels of how we understand, things and social relationships, all of that is moving towards that end that is represented in the institutional church or
in the institutional church. Right. So it's not that the church defines the political order so that you don't really have a distinction. The political order has a kind of an integrity of its own. It's in the traditional view, it's the perfect society, perfect meaning most complete. It's the community of all communities, the embracing community, but precise, and that is that's defined with respect to, as Aquinas says, the highest good to the highest degree. That's what defines the political order necessarily. So the political order is always going to be an interpretation of the highest good, but the highest good is unintelligible ultimately without God. And so you don't define the political order by God, you define it by the good. But the good itself, concretely speaking, opens up to God. And so you see, so that means then when the church says who God is in an authoritative way, that actually is able to resonate into the very depths of political order without having to be calling the shots from above. So let me give you a really concrete example of this. We have a Catholic family, right? So we belong to a parish. We understand ourselves as having a function in the church, but my family life is something that my wife and I, in a certain sense, the kids, in a certain sense, the dogs, will sort of give order to and give shape to, and we make decisions. Our priest, our parish priest, I would say, has authority over us precisely as, we recognize our family as belonging to the church, and so the priest represents an authority, but that doesn't mean that he makes our decisions for us. That would be absurd. He doesn't decide where our kids are going to go to school, but he represents the authority of the church that speaks definitively about what marriage is, what a human being is, illuminates what the destiny of human life is, and all of these things, and that authoritatively then provides the horizon within which we exercise our authority as a family. And I exercise my authority as a father. Well, you can imagine the political order the same way. The church authoritatively says this is the meaning of human existence, but doesn't make any of the
Right. That sort of opens
practical
up
decisions
new horizons
in
a way for the political order to think about the nature of reality, the nature of things, and how
and to do it
them.
according to its own lights in a way, and so it's in a way perfectly autonomous, and it's only perfectly autonomous inside of the greater authority of the church, and that's why you don't have the bishop actually. I mean, it may be the case, and this is in certain circumstances in history in the Middle Ages where you would have a bishop intervening into the affairs of a kingdom because of an abuse, right. and if the church is the highest authority, there would be an authority to do that. The problem is, it seems to me that integralism takes that interventionist model and makes it essential. This actually defines the normal way that the church relates to the political order. Whereas I would say, no, this is a remedial action in the case of disorder, but it's not what defines the essence of the thing.
Right. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. We could move towards the end and that question that we always get of,
oh no, what do we do now?
And maybe what do people make of this? Mm-hmm. Everything that we've said, everything that you say in your book, more clearly and extensively. Yeah. So we receive that. How do we understand ourselves in our current situation in relation to this positive vision of what political order ought to be in light of the church? Yeah. Because so we have this critique of liberalism, we see what's wrong with it, then we start to build towards what are the necessary elements, like a better understanding of rights, of religious freedom, of property, of things, and then moving towards then, okay, if we take that, how does the church and political order relate, as we were just talking about? Okay, we see it. We see it all now. Where are we left? How do we respond to it? Right. I mean, prudentially, and how do we see our current situation?
Yeah, I like the fact that you use the word prudentially there. I think prudence is the key, and I talk about this in the book. But we tend to misunderstand prudence. We think that prudence means disregarding, truth and making compromise. But what it actually means, there's no such thing as prudence that doesn't take its bearings from the truth, and that means from the highest truth. And that means for us to act genuinely prudentially, we have to make the clearest judgment that we can about the truth of the way things are. And even if we're powerless about them, powerless to do anything, human beings are not first pragmatic animals. We're actually rational animals. And simply making the judgment, we're affirming our humanity in a way that if we say we have no practical solution, so let's forget about thinking about things, we're actually denying our humanity by saying that.
Right, like in the face of these things that we see as contrary to our humanity and the direction that we're meant to go and our freedom, if you don't approach it with an understanding, a prudence that is understanding the things as they relate to the whole.
Yeah.
I mean, from even a cosmological perspective.
That's right.
If you go into it without that, then you allow yourself to be educated by the norms and laws that exist around us.
Oh, exactly. That's right.
So that's not.
It's not prudent.
It's not prudent.
And it doesn't work.
Yeah,
and we're becoming aware that it doesn't work.
Right, and you're letting yourself be formed by something that
by a false idea.
Right.
Yeah. No. I mean, there's so much to this. We think, well, if I can't do anything about it, it's not really worth thinking about. Let's just get along as well as we can. But that suggests that human beings are just about getting. I mean, we are rational. So thinking about it is actually doing something. Even if you can't change them, to understand that the way things are actually pose a certain threat to our humanity, that's an affirmation of our humanity. And we've already transformed our situation by making that judgment. And that judgment's always possible. So there's nothing that actually prevents us from seeing the truth and proclaiming it.
Yeah, so I mean, there's this idea of, suffering it is actually, helping to bring it into existence in some way.
Yeah.
Not that you want to just be passive,
Right.
but there's concrete steps that you can take,
That's right.
by just having a family and seeing the reality of things, and then also, taking greater actions in your locality as you can.
So prudence means, first seeing the truth and then realizing it as far as possible in these very particular circumstances. First of all, we need to see the truth. Secondly, we need to do what we can to realize it. And then, thirdly, this means, so it does mean then, actively trying to make a change. But then at the root of this, if this is rooted in the res publica, the realities of the very first thing that we can do and ought to do and always can is love the reality, the things that we have and are, and the things that surround us, learn to love them properly. And that in itself is already, you might say, a political act.
Yeah, and doing that in sort of a Christian understanding of the cross, cross, but also in a way that doesn't, it's not preventing you from building new institutions, that help to put this vision out there.
So we both suffer and we do.
Yes, right.
And above all, understand, and above even that, pray.
Well, with that, I think that's a great place to end. Be on the lookout for Dr. Schindler's Politics of the Real, the Church Between Liberalism and Integralism. It's available now. We're also coming out with a softcover version that'll be at a reduced price. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me, and I hope you are making progress on your dissertation.
We'll talk about that after. Yeah. Thanks.